this is the President of the United States. Who is this? Is it you again?
Look behind you.
This is my private line. How did you get through?
They're everywhere. All the time. We see them every day. But you have to look behind you.
There is nothing behind me. How did you get this number?
The spaceman told me.
What spaceman?
It doesn't matter. They're telling you about monsters. Please, you must look behind you.
Young lady, there are no monsters in the Oval Office.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Give up. Give up. Give up. Give up. Give up. Wait, Jimmy. Wait, Jimmy. Wait, Jimmy.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. The numbers to call tonight, 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. You ever wondered if all the plans in the world were like a week late? For all of those who said that the 23rd was going to be the day for reckoning and craziness? And they moved it to the 28th. Here we are at the 30th. We're already going into Syria. Oh, actually, Russia's going to Syria. They made the announcement about possible life on Mars. The Pope came. The New World Order is right there on the counter, ready to reach for every damn country that wants to be part of this world love party that they want to. I don't know what. Yeah. See, that's the thing. The recent announcements from NASA and other scientific publications are pushing the limits of our understanding of the solar system and our universe. And these events are unfolding as if, well, they're on cue. A little late, but still on cue. Because these events are called black swan events. They're here changing our minds about how we see things. They change the way we view ourselves and the condition for our well-being. Nearly 10 months into the new year, we see that the fall, and even as we go into winter, our minds will be focused on the frontier provided by space and the overall discord we're seeing play out here in places like Syria and Europe. And even though that many times this year we have come to the precipice of war, it becomes apparent that an announcement of life on Mars and elsewhere will have to be the very thing that unites us, as planned. Our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. Ronald Reagan, UN. If experiments of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN are successful, we may also be able to open a wormhole that would be convenient to facilitate a straight conduit to planets like Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. That'd be one way to beat the space travel problem, is to be able to have a conduit or some sort of a wormhole constructed so that we can go into it and come out on Mars or come out to Jupiter or Saturn or wherever we want to explore to see if there's life on any of the moons of Saturn or any of the moons of Jupiter. But also find out if there's life on Mars, which we now say is a high probability. And it appears that some areas of science already knew that the announcement about probable life would have to be made, and that the study of the first moments, the first second that our universe was born, was crucial to understanding how life evolved and not only is on its way, or that not only that it's on this planet, but it's on several planets all over the galaxy. Science tells us that we have now peered into the birth of creation. And depending on who you listen to, you will also hear that the universe is teeming with life. I had a friend of mine who was an astronomer in Utah, and he used to always tell me, you're on your show talking about life out in space and people think you're crazy, but the universe is teeming with, I would say, teeming with life. And the universe is teeming with life. And I'm like thinking, yeah, okay, great. I miss that. I wish you could say the universe is teeming with life, because it is now. At least we We speculate that it's teeming with life. It's also interesting to note that as crazy as it may sound, something as simple as TV static or the snow effect on analog TV signals provide the sound and 1% of the light that existed during the Big Bang. You learn something new every day. I read about that today, and it fascinated me because I really didn't know that back in the day when we had analog signals on television, you see you hear the static and you see the snow. What that is giving off 1% of the light of the Big Bang, and you hear that white noise, and that's part of it as well. Go figure. It was an open channel. It really was. It was an open channel, literally, to the universe. That's what you were hearing. That's what you're seeing with that light when you're watching snow. You're watching the remnants. 1%, just one. That's really tiny, isn't it? I'd say it's that. 1% of the Big Bang was seen on the analog TV. We don't see that anymore. We don't see the static anymore on televisions. Unless you have an old TV and you're still, you don't have a flat screen, or you don't have HD, or you don't have analog, and you don't have, digital. Then, but if you have analog still, you have an analog television, you turn on, see the white noise, and that is 1% of the Big Bang with the hum and everything else with it. And this may explain also why analog signals were replaced with digital signals. Think about it. We've discussed that buried in this electromagnetic noise may be the key to encrypted messages that have been broadcast by alien intelligences for a long time. Then on June 12, 2009, the Federal Communications Commission mandated that all U.S.-based television signals must be transmitted digitally. Now, who would have thought that the random pattern superimposed on the TV screen as a random flicker of dots or snow was the result of electronic noise and radiated electromagnetic noise from outer space echoing from the past into our present? Makes you want to get an analog TV just to watch it and say, guess what I'm watching? I'm watching the beginning of the universe, at least 1% of it. It's crazy, but it's true. If you think I'm lying, you look it up. I was just blown away when I was doing some research today. So, did you know that the static on the television is 1%? 1% of the Big Bang. It's crazy, but there are crazier things I've said. But seriously, look it up. And so, what this makes me think? It makes me wonder out loud this. Well, okay, so now we have digital signals on every television. All the old TVs, Grandpa watches, or that, man, I'm talking, man. I remember analog TVs. I guess Grandpa would watch an analog TV. And if I'm Grandpa, I'm not a Grandpa yet, but still. Watching the old analog. Yeah, we got the old analog and the old crystal. We listen on the crystal. The crystal set, radio set, for those of you that are too young to know what a crystal set is. So we listen on the crystal and watch the old analog. And we get to watch 1% of the Big Bang. Boom. And static too. And I'm thinking, was the idea of removing the analog signal, having all broadcasts being digital, and was that a clandestine way of blocking any signal that may have slipped through the static from aliens? Think about it. They changed it, and now with all this activity, and everybody having all these wild claims of alien transmissions from balloons some 22 miles in the sky, and and SETI going, oh, we need more money for alien contact, and la 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 la. Do you think it's kind of advantageous for them to get rid of the analog signal if that analog signal could somewhat? No one's going to sit down and watch hours and hours of snow on their screen hoping some alien will knock on the glass and say, hello. This explains why little Carol Ann was going, they're here, when she was up next to the television. The white noise sends signals. The whole, that makes me now, I think these things, and I don't have to be stoned to think these things. I wonder about the snow on your screen that was on analog screens, and whether or not, if you watched it long enough, maybe you'd see aliens coming out of the screen at you. Science could have very, very well been aware of the transmissions that could slip through the cracks after, for some years. Places like SETI have been using their radio telescopes for years, just begging that we get a message, just like the elephant Horton in Dr. Seuss's book, Horton Hears the Who. That little, that little dust speck. They said, well, we won't destroy this world if it gives us a signal that it's there. Yeah. So, yeah, Horton Hears a Who is... I always thought that Horton Hears a Who was a metaphor for alien contact. Because when Horton's running around with this little dust speck saying, hey, there's a world on this dust speck, they want to talk to us. And sure, we're going to boil it in bezelnut oil. And we're going to take Horton and we're going to turn him into glue or an ivory, something ivory. I don't know. But see, that's the thing, is that it is a metaphor for life, I believe, on other planets or on some other world. That we are on a small world, a small, tiny world, and other worlds out there we need to explore. Many worlds out there we need to explore. Even renowned physicist Stephen Hawking has weighed in on the alien question, and he says that, well, he most definitely believes that aliens are out there, and he has stated, quote, if the aliens visit us, the outcome could be much like when Columbus landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native American. Such advanced aliens would perhaps become nomads looking to conquer and colonize whatever planets they can reach. While Hawking has given us warning about first contact, he also has engaged in a bit of doublethink, and I'm going to tell you about that coming up. Doublethink, it just, and once again, he said, and people said, well, he said this once before. He did. He came back and said once again that be aware of the Martian announcement because aliens could crush us. So he said, crush us. It's more fuerte. It's with more force. Crush us. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. We'll be back. Let's get back to Stephen Hawking. Now, Stephen Hawking has said that he's worried that the aliens will crush us if we keep, picking at this and wanting them to come. He said that it's going to be probably like when Columbus found the Native Americans. It didn't do too well for the Native Americans. Now, a lot of people have been expressing their anger over this statement because they're saying things like, well, it's totally arrogant to think the aliens are going to come here and actually, chew a lot of bubble gum and kick ass, and they're all out of bubble gum type scenario. But no, that's not the point. The point is when Columbus came here, he brought with him all the diseases that the Native Americans did not have. You see, we think that, well, they came here and basically, they took out their swords and started stabbing them, cutting off their heads and stuff. Yeah, maybe they did that. All the other guys that pretended to be the white god with a beard too, like Cortez and Cook and all these people. Yeah, they came in and they made their conquests. But the truth is, it wasn't for those that weren't killed or shot at or whatever. They were contracting diseases that were being brought over from Europe. And so when Stephen Hawking talks about that, I think he's also referring to that. I mean, he has been giving us warnings about first contact, but he also has engaged in a bit of doublethink by putting up the money necessary to finance the ongoing quest to communicate or otherwise intercept messages from extraterrestrials. Now, if you remember, last July, we talked about Hawking and Russian tycoon Yuri Milner. They held a news conference in London to announce their new project, which would include injecting $100 million and a whole lot of brain power into the search for intelligent extraterrestrial life. It was called Breakthrough Listen. And what I see here is a dubious paradox or a contradictory stance, doublethink, on whether we should or should not bait the aliens into coming into our contemporary world. With that NASA announcement about Mars, we may find that alien life can be found in our solar neighborhood. And for the majority of scientists, the theory of intelligent life existing out in space has been called a pipe dream for so long. I don't think people really have had it set in on them. But yes, the probability of life is way high now. It's like saying life is on Mars, but they didn't really say it. They said water on Mars, salty water on Mars. And so it's high probability time. It's not really necessarily proof, but it's high probability time. But see, here's the deal. When Hawking said what he said about Columbus, he was talking about diseases, right? Well, let's take a little bit of, let's use some logic here, or some reverse logic here. While a majority of the scientists say finding intelligent life on Mars would be, slim. Okay, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate here with the alien thing. So they're saying that, hey, finding intelligent life on Mars would be slim. But microbial life and space bacteria have always been something that science has said will be the first discovery on any planet or any moon that they discover or that they attempt to discover. Believe it or not, and you can look this up too. This is up there with the television screens and the Big Bang. Believe it or not, NASA has always kept in its files something called the NASA Policy Directive 8020.7G. Look it up. It's the NASA Policy Directive 8020.7G. The Office of NASA's Science Mission Directorate has issued a policy on planetary protection requirements for human extraterrestrial missions. And that is how they word it. It is planetary protection requirements for human extraterrestrial missions. The policy states, quote, the conduct of scientific investigations of possible extraterrestrial life forms, precursors, and remnants must not be jeopardized. In addition, the Earth must be protected from the potential hazard posed by extraterrestrial matter carried by a spacecraft returning from another planet or other extraterrestrial sources. Therefore, for certain space missions, target planet combinations controls on organic and biological contamination carried by spacecraft shall be imposed in accordance with directives implementing this policy. The provisions of this directive cover all spaceflight missions, robotic and human, which may intentionally or unintentionally carry Earth organisms and organic constituents to the planets or other solar system bodies, and any mission employing spacecraft which are intended to return to Earth and or its biosphere from extraterrestrial targets of exploration. This is an actual document, a document that was prepared long before we found out the probability of life on Mars. And this policy functions as a clear indication that NASA is already aware of biological contaminants leaving Earth and contaminating other planets, and the reverse, where exobiological life could be brought back and destroy the biosphere. So when Stephen Hawking says, hey, this is going to be like Christopher Columbus invading our area or maybe killing the Native Americans, it doesn't mean that Columbus and aliens are going to kill us. It means that they bring diseases with them that most certainly could wipe us out and create an extinction level event. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. We'll be back. Tim Beckley, Mr. UFO, you're on Ground Zero. Thank you for being here tonight.
Well, welcome. I'm happy to be on, Clyde. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. So the announcement about Mars, what was your first reaction when you heard it?
Well, I've been thinking about life on Mars since I was a kid. I was born in the late 1940s, and along came all these science fiction movies. Yeah. And of course, the life forms outside of maybe the day the Earth stood still, they were often very scary, very monstrous in a lot of cases. But I don't think we were so well. I think there was one or two movies that talked about contamination and bringing possible germs with them, because even then the scientists who met up with the aliens always seem to have some sort of protection suit on. So yeah. I guess it was more probably in the back of our mind in those days, where it is right out in front. But, it's interesting that here on one hand, NASA and the government says, oh, no, there are no aliens, there are no extraterrestrials here on Earth. And yet, on the other hand, they have a law that the extraterrestrial exposure law, which prevents anyone from actually coming in contact with either a ship or a being. So I guess if you see something land, you got to keep your distance and I don't know. I just think, again, it's kind of a double standard. Yeah. We're told one thing on one hand, but yet everybody wants to meet, or at least a lot of people do want to meet extraterrestrial life. We're hoping that they're not all, the size of amoeba or something, but I guess you've got to start somewhere.
Well, and NASA seems, and ever since, and I pointed this out many times, ever since we've gotten even closer to disclosure, what feels like disclosure, NASA has always done doublethink on us, saying, oh, yeah, it looks like life. Oh, it's not life. Don't get your hopes up. Oh, it looks like this. Oh, but it's, and they do this double standard, this doublethink thing. And of course, now Stephen Hawking is doing the double think thing by saying, well, aliens are going to crush us. They probably are going to come down here and they're going to value us like we value bacteria and stomp us, into a pulp. And then he turns around and he spends $100 million along with another Russian guy to fund SETI so they can find extraterrestrials.
Well, everybody's looking for a little attention, I think. And NASA, because of its needing, money constantly to keep the space program going, is always kind of pushing, something. They kind of give us the teaser every maybe twice a year, wouldn't you say?
Right.
I mean, how many times have we heard that NASA has discovered a planet that's almost identical to Earth? It's like they re-released the same press release.
I would agree. The Kepler planet stories mean absolutely nothing to me. But now, as we're dealing with our new at our close neighbor Mars, and they're telling us that water may be up there, I'm beginning to wonder if all of this crying wolf has made everybody, less aware or even not caring anymore about what's up there. 888-673-3700. Tim Beckley with us tonight on Ground Zero. We'll be back.
FM News 101 KXL.
More with Clyde Lewis and Ground Zero on FM News 101.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. Tim Beckley is with us tonight, Mr. UFO. So glad to have him on the program and discussing the recent announcement the NASA has given us about Mars, the probability of life, and now extraterrestrial exposure laws and also laws and mandates to state, actually the directives to state, that we have to be more careful and decontaminate robots, spacecraft, and what have you coming down from any extraterrestrial source, whether it be the moon or the Mars. And I was reading that today, and I'm thinking, this is amazing. I don't think a lot of people out there even understand or know that NASA has these documents and they've been preparing for this all along, and that if you read through their documents, they're already acting as though that life is on Mars. Wouldn't you say?
Well, yes. Our fascination with Mars, though, goes way back. And talk of water and canals on Mars, a couple of 100 years old. Percival Lowell, right? He wrote a book, I think in 1905, called Mars and the Canals. Now, he was discredited, of course. They said really that the canals were nothing more than optical illusions, but maybe they weren't. It's always been there. I was going to say under the surface, but no pun intended.
Right.
It's always been in the back of our mind that Mars might have life on it. Of all the planets in the solar system, that's probably, at least people feel, that's our best bet. Even going back to the Greek and Roman times, what was it? Mars was the god of war. Yeah. During the 1940s and the 1950s, the contactees like George Adamski and George Van Tassel, they talked of meeting beings from the planet Mars and going for rides inside of their spaceship. So Mars has always been in our consciousness. I remember when I first met David Bowie for the first time, he was dressed like a Martian, at least a good-looking Martian.
Right.
He wasn't, monstrous or anything at all. That was Ziggy Stardust, of course. And a lot of his music and a lot of music of other groups have centered around the idea of Mars or intelligent life in outer space. So it's been a long time coming, but eventually it's going to be here, one way or the other. Yeah. Hopefully it won't be it won't be bacteria and it won't spread as a germ. But, I think myself, we've got to take a chance. Why should we take a backseat to just discovery because we're worried about something? They're worried about that we may have hostile beings coming here from somewhere else, but we also might have beneficial beings coming here from other planets. Are we supposed to hide under a rock? Absolutely not. Not as far as I'm concerned.
I think we can profile the aliens. And speaking of which, you mentioned David Bowie and Ziggy Stardust, and I've always wondered if we were ever going to have full disclosure on David Bowie. I would say this. It's always been my fantasy to have David Bowie call a news conference and all the microphones are on him, and all the pictures are being sent, and he's there with Iman and his wife, and he's standing there with her, and he says, "I got to tell you all, I'm really an alien. My name is really Ziggy Stardust. I fell to Earth, and this is my alien companion." And everybody would believe it. I think.
Well, David was even as a teenager growing up. I've done a couple of books on celebrities that have had flying saucer experiences, and he's been at one point he was deeply immersed in the occult and UFOs, not necessarily the good aspect of it. He had some hard times with some possession and exorcism and so forth. But as a teenager living in England, he actually edited a UFO magazine, a newsletter, know. And as I understand, he had at least 3 UFO sightings. And he's also was curious about a UFO crash that took place in the desert. He was in a hotel room in Michigan.
Right.
And apparently there was an announcement on TV about something that had landed, and he spoke to everybody in the room about his fascination with the subject and about this particular landing. Now, we're not sure whether it was Roswell or Kingman or Aztec, but he has shown a lively interest in the subject. In fact, I think you've probably had Grant Cameron on the the program. Yes. And of course, he's convinced that these extraterrestrials or these aliens are really using celebrities like David Bowie and other musicians to get their message across.
Well, and I was reading a while back an interview with Mick Jagger. He also has a fascination for extraterrestrials and UFOs. There are a lot. We were just discussing Ron Patton, my producer, and I, Billy Corrigan, and his fascination with these types of things. And also Prince has expressed his interest in this type of phenomenon. And so there are a lot of well-known celebrities and rock stars. The band Blink-182, of course, they've written a song about extraterrestrials and aliens, and Crosby, Stills and Nash did Mr. Spaceman. Everybody seems to have, it's all been a part of the lore. It's all been a part.
It has. Absolutely.
Of our history.
My favorite story actually is about Jimi Hendrix. In fact, the U.S. Postal Department released a commemorative stamp with Jimi Hendrix on it, and right over the top of his head is a UFO beaming down on him. Now, one of the members of his early group, the Squires, was a fellow by the name of Curtis Knight. Yeah. In fact, he wrote some of the songs that Jimmy performed. This would be back in the, early mid-'60s. Now, according to Curtis, who I had many conversations with, they were on their way back from Woodstock one night. Now, this wasn't during a big festival, but they were caught in the middle of a blizzard. And they were in a van. There were,
Tim,
members
we're running out of time. Tim, we're running out of time. It's 8:29. We're almost out of time. We've got to go to the break for news. But I want to hear this story when you get back, okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you. Tim Beckley with us on Ground Zero. 888-673-3700. We'll be back. And you are listening to Ground Zero. Tonight, Mr. UFO himself, Mr. Tim Beckley on the program tonight, discussing a number of things. First off, the NASA announcement about water and probable life on Mars, a follow-up to that. Possibility of microbial life being discovered. Extraterrestrial exposure laws that NASA has, and documents that mandate that decontamination be a very serious thing, but now they're beginning to reconsider that microbial life could come here and create a problem. And that's something that's most definitely a concern here. And also we were talking about rock stars and their connections to aliens. And of course, I just played that After the Gold Rush song, made famous by Neil Young and redid by Dolly Parton and Linda Ronstadt and Emmylou Harris. I think that version is beautiful, and that's why I decided to play it tonight. But you were saying you were talking about a story before we had to go to the break about some rock stars that you knew of that were in a snowstorm.
Oh, yes. Well, now, in my book, Shirley MacLaine Meets the Palladians, I talk about the experience that Jimi Hendrix had. It was related to me by his original bass player, a fellow by the name of Curtis Knight. In fact, I'm still in touch with Curtis's wife. He passed away about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But she still, maintains that the story is true, and he related it not only to me, but to her as well. apparently they were returning from Woodstock, as I mentioned, and it was in the middle of winter. This had nothing to do with the festival. That was a couple of years later. And they were stuck in a blizzard. I mean, the snow was really coming down, and their van got stuck. And they got to the point where the van wouldn't move, and they were afraid to keep the heater on because they might get, carbon monoxide in their system and pass out, and goodness knows what might happen to them. Well, now, according to Curtis, at this point, a rocket-shaped ship landed near the van that they were in, and a door opened, and a ramp came down, and on the ramp was this being, angelic-looking being. Well, at least he said it had wings. I don't know how angelic it was, but they were not doing drugs or anything like that, according to Curtis. In fact, he didn't smoked a little pot maybe, but he was not a drug user. And the being came out and circled the van that they were in, and the snow melted all around him. And in a few minutes' time, they were able to start the van and drive back to Manhattan without any further incident. Now, UFOs did play an important role in Jimmy's life and in his career. In fact, there is a rare video out there that was shot in Maui. He was giving a concert. The video is called Rainbow Bridge, and you can find it on YouTube. It's many, many years old, of course. And after the concert, he goes into a sweat lodge, I think, or some kind of teepee that they have there. And he sets yoga style, on the ground, and he's surrounded by fans. And of course, these were pretty much hippies in those days. And he starts rapping about the Space Brothers and UFOs and reincarnation. And he believed, and quite a few of these other musicians thought that they were actually star children, that they had been placed here on Earth during a very critical and important period in our spiritual and physical growth. Now, I don't know, Clyde. I mean, it's an interesting story, and it's certainly fascinating coming from someone like Jimi Hendrix, but it's not that unusual. At least back in those days, we had what we would call the flying saucer or UFO culture. It was very predominant. Now it appears it's maybe a little bit more low key. We've gone from beautiful space beings, the Nordic types of supposedly extraterrestrials. I call them ultra-terrestrials because I don't know where they come from, but I am convinced that something is going on and that there is a strange phenomena here that is worthy of some investigation. In fact, I'm more prone, of course, to be interested in that instead of spending. How many millions of dollars did you say we're spending sending signals into space?
Sending what in? Well, Stephen Hawking and this Russian millionaire was going to spend $100 million, or billionaire actually. $100 million, yeah. They were going to put in $100 million, inject $100 million into contacting aliens from space. And another thing too, I was corrected from Jay Dillon tonight. I said something about the TV screen, and 1% of the light on the TV screen is the Big Bang. It's kind of incorrect here. I was just laughing it off because what it is that 1% of the static on the screen is from the Big Bang. Mm-hmm. So it means a lot different. So thank you, Jay, for correcting me. I was just, like I said, I was laughing so hard, so embarrassed by not knowing that I wanted to share it with everybody, and I kind of shared it wrong. So I'm not one not to correct myself on the air.
Now,
I just did.
Now, I don't know if this ties in or not, but there have been a couple of cases where apparently TV signals have bounced back a decade or 2 decades later after they had gone out.
I've seen that before. I've read that where people have called television stations that aren't real, or they've heard broadcasts that never happened. These are ghost broadcasts. In fact, it was the inspiration for Cult Radio, which is the name of Ground Zero before it changed its name. The idea of a country DJ falling asleep doing a late night show and hearing alien signals come over his headphones. And he realized that if he was to have turned off, or at least with dead air, there was a segment in the dead air where you could hear alien voices, and he wanted so badly for the whole world to hear these alien voices that he came up with a theory that if every radio station and every TV station, every ham radio and CB radio were to turn off for 5 minutes, we would probably hear the aliens or see them come, because we are such a noisy planet that intelligent life would wonder, why did everything shut off on that planet?
Well, WOR, which is, you're on WOR here in New York, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Back in the 1930s, actually shut their transmitter off for a minute or two to try an experiment to see if they could pick up some sort of signal, intelligent or otherwise, from Mars. Now, I don't know how successful the actual picking up the signals were, but I have seen a printout of some sort of diagram that looked like a face that was somehow transmitted and received on a ticker tape. And I can't say that it looks like the face on Mars exactly, but it was a face.
Right.
And so experiments have been tried along this line. Mm-hmm. Also, back in the 1970s, I spent 3 days at NASA in Washington, D.C. Now, I had gone there. I was on assignment for Saga magazine to do an article on UFO sightings of the astronauts. And I must say, NASA was fairly open to me. They gave me the transcripts. It was pound and page after page of manuscript in those days. And my associate, Harold Sulkland, and I, we sat there and went through this, and we found some phenomenal sightings that they had, or at least things that could be classified as UFOs. And one of the things that was happening, that on several occasions, a strange, unintelligible language was being heard. And in one case, the song, I think, Where Angels Fear to Tread, was being transmitted, and they picked it up on their in the capsule. And of course, this is on closed, closed channels, which nobody is supposed to have access to. So,
are you aware of the Ed Snowden, Neil deGrasse Tyson debate that they had on a podcast a couple of days ago about how Neil deGrasse Tyson asked Snowden, who is encryption specialist, about aliens, and he brought it up, and Snowden said that perhaps we have ignored the signals that have been sent to us through static, that in between the dead spaces of the static, which is back to that whole idea of watching the 1% of the static in the screen to see the Big Bang. He said, would you ever wonder what is in that dead space? And have you ever cranked it to the gills to hear what may be there? And so I did that. I found a recording of a broadcast that was off of an infrared recording system that was on a balloon that went 22 miles up into the sky. And they thought they were recording ocean waves or what have you. But this guy from NASA had said, this sounded like it was something from the X-Files. Now, when I listened to it at regular speed, it was down in the 20 hertz, 22 hertz area. But when I listened to it at regular speed, I heard things in the dead space of the static that I wanted to turn up. So I grabbed the volume, I cranked it up, and I heard, and I swear, I heard what sounded like rudimentary or communication. Now, it wasn't in English, but it certainly sounded like communication that was going back and forth from something. And it really fascinated me that I heard that. And I was playing it for people. People thought I was crazy. But then I played it on the air the other night, and people were beginning to hear this conversation. And then comes the NASA announcement. And I'm thinking, wow, this is all being timed out in such a way where we may have found communication. Snowden, deGrasse Tyson talk about this. We have the announcement. And now we're talking about microbial life and how it may be dangerous with these new documents that NASA has issued. It just seems to me this is all going according to plan.
Well, ham operators for years, for decades, had been receiving all sorts of signals and voices on their receivers.
Right.
In fact, Barry Goldwater, who of course was a believer in UFOs and wanted to find out what was inside Hangar 18 and inside the Blue Room, and they told him, if he ever mentioned it again, he'd be in serious trouble. But he was a ham radio operator. He was a ham radio operator, and he was picking up mysterious signals on a certain bandwidth for many, many months. Now, also,
we got to go to break right now, and we'll be right back. We'll be right back with Tim Beckley. Keep it here on Ground Zero.
FM News 101 KXL.
The conversation is now headed in the direction of alien transmissions, or the idea of alien on ham radios and all this. And I wanted to play for you, Tim, that sequence I was telling you about the balloon, some 22 miles up. Now, I want you to listen carefully, because what I did is I took a simple recording that was from this NASA experiment, And at first it was like just hearing the static. You'll hear the static, but between the static bursts, I managed to take the dead space and I cranked it as loud as I could so you could hear what was between the bursts. And what you'll hear, in my opinion, sounds like alien transmission. Now listen to this. Here we go. So what do you think of that?
Spooky. I would say just darn right spooky. Now, okay, you have an example there. It's about, a little bit less than a minute long. Yeah. How long were you trying to capture the sound?
Well, I captured, the segment itself was about a minute or so. They only provided about a minute or so. So I took the first segment. I couldn't find the first segment. The first segment, when I played it and I cranked up the middle volume on it, I heard what sounded like this really wavy kind of siren sound, as if it was like a warning, kind of like how we do the emergency alert system, where we do the EAS tone. It sounded like it wasn't an EAS tone, but it was like a clearing tone, where you hear it. It was kind of wide and then lower, and then it got a little wider and it got a little louder. And then I thought, well, I don't hear any communication there, but what I do hear is this ability, or this moment, I think, where they were clearing the channel. And then I then went and I found the other static piece, and I upped the segments in between the clicks and the pops, and I heard what sounded like attempts at bringing down some strange data loop or data feed or something, and it sounded intelligent to me. It sounded like that there was something in between the static. As Snowden said, and Neil deGrasse Tyson said, if you listen closely, you may be able to pick up on what could be encrypted alien language, and it's buried in the static.
Well, seemed like there was actually one word. I mean, I don't know how you would isolate it, but at one point there was something that seemed a little bit beyond what else, the rest of the information. Right. That was being transmitted. But, of course, this is kind of reminiscent of the EVP, the electronic voice phenomena, which people, of course, think that, or at least the going theory is that these are the voices from people on the other side. Right. But we have no way of proving that, really. No. They could be voices from other planets. They could be voices from other dimension. They could be voices from the future, or they could be generated by the Earth itself. And
I actually read a study, Tim, that no matter where you are, no matter where you go, you will always, if you have a recorder, will pick up EVP. So you don't have to be in a haunted place in order to get those voices. And that's what, once again, throws a lot of the paranormal investigations into a quandary. What am I listening to if I'm doing EVP? If this is not if these are not voices from the other side, then are they voices from another dimension, or are they voices from space? And this is a very good point, Tim, and we got to go to break. But yeah, I mean, when you're listening to that and you're hearing this kind of static and conversation, you don't know exactly what's happening, because we've never had anything to compare it to. No aliens to compare it to. Nothing else, because we haven't been able to get access to that data. And soon, with the announcement that NASA has made, we may find ourselves in a situation where we can recognize these things a whole lot more and understand these directives that they're proposing. We'll be back with more. Keep it here.
And as president, Ground Zero is indeed essential on radio and is essential to who we are.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said,
Wait, see me.
the loudspeaker spoke up and said,
Wait, see me.
the loudspeaker spoke up and said,
Wait, see me.
give up, give up, give up.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. Tonight, Tim Beckley is with us, Mr. UFO. We're talking about a number of things. The consecutive pattern we've seen in, the Pope, the aliens, then from the Pope and aliens to messages being discussed with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Ed Snowden, from that to the NASA announcement. And Stephen Hawking again coming forward and saying what he said about aliens would crush us. And yet he's giving $100 million for something called Breakthrough Listen, which I say is some sort of dubious paradox here. I don't know how to take this. But then NASA, this is in the sequence, NASA has this file. It's NASA Policy Directive 8020.7G. It's the Office of NASA Science Mission Directorate. It's issued a policy on planetary protection requirements for human extraterrestrial missions. I'm going to read the policy again, and I want to make it clear that this indicates to me that this functions as, I think, proof that they are already leaning towards the probability of life. The conduct of scientific investigations of possible extraterrestrial life forms, precursors, and remnants must not be jeopardized. In addition, the Earth must be protected from the potential hazard posed by extraterrestrial matter carried by spacecraft returning from another planet or other extraterrestrial sources. Therefore, for certain space mission target planet combinations, controls on organic and biological contamination carried by spacecraft shall be imposed in accordance with directives implementing this policy. The provisions of this directive cover all space flight missions, robotic and human, which may intentionally or unintentionally carry Earth organisms and organic constituents to the planets or other solar system bodies, and any mission employing spacecraft which are intended to return to Earth and or its biosphere from extraterrestrial targets of exploration. Which, once again, I tell you, they are already preparing for life, more microbial life. And that was always a concern. And I think that was the concern of Stephen Hawking when he made his statement about the aliens. But there's also a group called the International Committee Against Mars Sample Return, or ICAMSR. Barry DeGregorio is the president of this group. They're an advocacy group of scientists who campaign against Mars sample return. The committee was founded in the year 2000. They have been quoted in the news stories and books discussing these types of missions. The ICAMSR charter states that their main goal is that samples should be certified safe in space first before they are returned to Earth. Basically, setting up a lab either on Mars, on the Moon, or on the International Space Station so that they can test this life or whatever it may be and not bring us into peril with a biological contamination that may harm the biosphere. So the question I have is, if you were a scientist, would you take the chance of having the entire Earth infected with a microbial life form? Would you require that a lab be constructed to actually in space to analyze this life? Or would you take the chance of bringing the microbe back and having it die in transit, which would once again probably negate the whole thing anyway of proving there's life out there? Tim, what do you think you'd do in this case? Do you think it should be wise to maybe build a lab in space, or at least install a more, an improved lab on the International Space Station?
Well, how long is it going to be before we have the capability to do something like that? I mean, we're talking about landing on Mars with earthly occupants in 2030, 2040. Mm-hmm. It just seems like an awful long time. Now, there have been incidences throughout the history of bacteria and germs that killed large numbers of people. In fact, I think in the 1300s, there was the Black Plague that killed 40 million people in Europe. Mm-hmm. And there are some people who associated with mysterious lights in the skies and figures on the ground with sickles and so forth. But our ability to handle germs and bacteria has certainly come a long way since then. I mean, obviously, we quarantine people with Ebola and so forth. So I don't know. Take a chance. What's the chances that it could contaminate Earth? I would say myself, I would feel that it would be a small possibility worth a chance? Yeah, if we took the necessary precautions. But I mean, when is this going to happen? I won't be around to see it.
You won't be around, but I might be. And see, this is the thing. I would say this: we don't know. And somebody had made the comment, and I can lean towards this comment, that maybe the life up there may be a lot like our life up there. But the truth is, life down here, bacterial life. But there are certain forms of bacteria and microbial life that exist in Chile that are in brine water in a desert area, a very arid area, and they are extremophiles, and they can live under these extreme conditions, and they're not dangerous. But are we seeing the same type of thing up there? Do we worry about contaminating? I mean, they must really have a worry of contamination of either Mars or our planet due to the fact, I mean, you remember that the pneumonia virus lived on the LEM, on the moon for quite some time because one of the astronauts just happened to have a cough, and it remained in the LEM for a long period of time. One of the astronauts detected the virus when they returned.
You know, we have also here in recent weeks in the New York area a reinsurgence of the Legionnaire's disease, and you know, originally they were saying, it's part of the contamination in the water towers and stuff like this, but they sent inspectors out to every building with a water tower and examined it and all, and it's still cropping up. Right. So you know, there are plenty of diseases here to worry about. Now, what's the possibility that something like that could be analyzed while it was actually still on Mars? Do we necessarily have to bring it back? Do we have the capability of study it right there on the ground?
Right. I think maybe we should, if not having a robot do it so nobody's in danger.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. That would be the first step because they're not likely to bring it back anytime soon.
Right. Yeah, I mean, see, these are some things I'm sure NASA's already thought of, especially with these new directorates that I was reading about earlier. Let's go to Robert in Virginia. Hi, Robert. You're on with Tim Beckley. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. You're on the air.
All right. Yeah, I just, I'm a Cherokee Indian, and disease is what killed our people off when the Europeans came across the pond.
Yes.
It wasn't their technology. It wasn't nothing else. It was disease.
Sure.
So my concern is, we contact aliens, or we go to Mars, we go to wherever. That is a big concern. How many lives are we willing to sacrifice to learn a lesson? In 1971, the Mariner Project showed the same thing as they're showing today.
Exactly.
Life on Mars.
Yes.
Why is it taking 43 years for them to say, okay, hey, there's a possibility to let society know that, 43 years later, we had the technology in 1974 to be in Mars.
I agree with you.
But we're not there?
Yeah, well, and another thing, too, is when Gilbert Levin said that there was life on Mars, they basically dismissed him, and he had proof. And, of course, the one discovery where they found that fossilized life on Martian rocks, and even President Clinton said, this is an amazing find, and then NASA dismissed it. And see, that's another thing, too. We ask about the timing, Robert, and you're so right about this. The timing seems a little peculiar, don't you think?
Yes, it does. And, I'm a firm believer in a lot of things, but I hold on to my Native American, beliefs. We're in the sixth reign of man. The fifth reign ended in 2012.
And so now we're in the sixth.
Is the sixth reign of man going to be on Mars? The sun has its own cycle. The sun is a living being, and it's living and dying just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
It started out cold. It's getting hotter.
Yes.
So are we like jumping from rock to rock now?
Well, we may have to. That's the whole point. We may have to. I mean, with all the climate scares they've been giving us and with all the things they've been telling us, a breakaway civilization has always been in the cards, and it'll be the elite that will have the money and the ability to go into these space rockets that are pretty much buses that they can take to either the moon or Mars. And so the time is short. the time to think about getting off the rock and probably saving oneself is far more intriguing now than it's ever been. And I think that we need to be aware that this will once again be an option for those of us who don't want to stay on the planet, who don't want to endure a possible cataclysm or something that has been in the works for some time.
I agree with you 100%. And, I never believed I'd see this in my lifetime.
Me neither. And, I haven't either. And I think once again, I'm amazed that we're even talking about this subject. Tim and myself, we've been talking about this for years. And as he said in the beginning of the program, I've always known that Mars has probably had life on it. We've been told this water or whatever for some time. We've been intrigued by it. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. Tim Beckley is with us tonight on Ground Zero. I need your phone calls. 888-673-3700. We'll be back.
You're listening to Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis on FM News 101.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. Tim Beckley with us, Mr. UFO, on the program, and we're going to go to TJ in Rhode Island. Hi, TJ. You're on Ground Zero with Tim Beckley.
Oh, hi, Clyde. I love the show, but this is a variation very much of your Ebola show, if you remember.
Can be.
Where you were wondering about bringing people here, because, again, killer bees, Clyde. You cannot bring something that is not indigenous to another location. And as far as I'm concerned, anybody who leaves the planet should kiss it goodbye, because they're not even taking into account things like mutations within Earth-originated viruses, Earth-originated microbes, yeasts, bacteria, whether or not they end up mutating by combining with the extraterrestrial type.
Right, and
then
it's
you end
funny.
up with the third one, and then jumping species.
Sure.
Suppose you bring something back that is not necessarily lethal to you, but then you give it to your dog, and your dog gives it to your cat, and your cat gives it to the bird it tried to catch outside.
Right.
Now, 4 days later, you're going to end up with no snakes on the planet, or no you.
And that's an excellent thing to talk about, because I see this. And Tim, remember H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds story and how the aliens were killed?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
they were killed by our own bacteria. It was the little things that God had made, according to Wells, that killed the aliens. Go ahead.
And that's straight up bacteria. That's directly lethal to them. Now I'm talking about things that take 3 species to mutate before they become lethal to you.
Right.
Or something that has to mate or be infected, say, bacteria by an alien virus. Then you even go 3 species away before it becomes lethal to you. Now, once you...
I was going to say, and Tim, I don't know how you feel on this, but, doesn't this take away the romanticism of aliens? I mean, we have to be practical. Am I correct?
Yes and no, because if somebody is able to leave their planet how many millions or hundreds of millions of light years, you and I are incapable of understanding what level of technology they have, for one, and two, we also don't know what their immune system is like. For example, you remember Star Trek Voyager with species 8472, the one that the Borg couldn't co-opt?
Right.
Well, they might be a species like that where they can travel around, but we would not be in the same enviable position.
Or what about the aliens from Alien, acid blood? We end up, melting ourselves if we try to kill it or dissect it. I mean, see, that's the thing, is that, there's a lot of things that have been covered in science fiction that we have to take into consideration, but I don't really feel that we have explored the idea of microbial alien life. Maybe the X-Files Fight the Future did, when they talked about the black oil, and they said that there was a virus that mutated, and the well-manicured man set Mulder down and said, your extraterrestrials, Mulder, has been a virus, has been around since the cavemen walked the planet.
Yeah, but now even think, suppose it's something similar to that ends up being the type that is utilized by plants and ends up in the food supply, because it's not airborne, it's not necessarily waterborne, but it exists within the mineral content and is taken up and then it infects you.
Well, there's always been that fear, and TJ, I think maybe you would be aware of this as well. There's always been that fear that contact with aliens or even alien life forms, microbial life, if it was on a grander scale, could easily bring about an extinction level event. And we don't even know if the extinction level event has happened when we had the abduction cases, because ever since the abduction cases, we've had strange diseases befall us. Anything from AIDS, HIV, to bovine spongiform encephalopathy, to mad cow disease, to Morgellons disease. I mean, all these things have happened after the so-called alien abduction phenomena, and that would say to me that perhaps we've already come in contact with some alien diseases, and these alien diseases are now with us, and we're trying to cure them, and we're trying to remedy the problem as best we can.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because every time I look up and I see a contrail, all I can think of is, those are spices.
Exactly. TJ, any comments before we go to break?
No, that was, one other one is, he's not a hypocrite, because Dr. Hawkins could actually be more honest by saying, I am listening, I am not trying to contact them, I'm just eavesdropping.
It's semantics, man. It's all semantics.
No, because it says listen. He doesn't want to speak to them. He just wants to know where they are so he can walk the other way or roll the other way.
I've never heard it explained in such a way that makes me smile, TJ, and I really thank you for coming on the program tonight.
All right, well, you keep that in mind, and remember, like I always say to everybody I genuinely like, I hope the good gets better and the bad gets lost.
That's very good, TJ. Thank you for the call. Very good call from TJ. Tim, maybe that's true. I mean, I've been saying that the whole time that Stephen Hawking has created this dubious paradox, but it's true. Maybe he is trying to contact them, so he gets the idea to get the hell out of Dodge by rolling away somewhere and hiding so the aliens don't come and eat him.
Well, somehow I cannot take such a negative view here. I mean, if we had that attitude towards everything, we'd never explore even our own planet.
Right.
We'd be afraid to, get off the rowboat or the canoe. I don't know. I just don't see it. Like I say, this is 2015. We have more precautions available than we certainly did, 25, 50, or 100 years ago. And by the time this happens on a theoretical basis, probably we'll even have more precautions in play. But okay, let's do it on Mars. If somehow we can take these.
Right.
Well, first of all, we don't know if they're there. We know that now they're saying there's water, even though we suspected that it might have been there,
but they're taking,
decades ago, right?
Right. But they're taking the precautions, just in case. And I think they're leaning more towards the idea that life is there. It would seem plausible that that's the case. And to follow up with what they talked about on Monday, these new directorates and all this other stuff, I think are the formalities. Even the United Nations has their own protocols for welcoming alien life or even welcoming the possibility of microbial life. And this was done many years ago when they assigned the outer space consult that was there at the United Nations. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. Tim Beckley with us on Ground Zero. We'll be back.
Contamination process complete. Have a nice day.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. Little science fiction predictive programming for you all. Prometheus, about aliens who want to kill us with biological weapons. Bacteria from space. Bacteria that evolves into those acid, bloody aliens. And, of course, Andromeda Strain, Michael Crichton's thriller about bringing back some contaminant. And I was reminded by Christopher tonight in an email. Remember the third Planet of the Apes movie? Ricardo Montalban was showing Roddy McDowall's ape character the memorial statue to all the dogs and cats who were extinct due to bacteria brought back by the astronauts. It has been in our mythologies. It's been our movies. It's been part of scripts. The idea that perhaps we could be contaminated by this life that we've discovered or that may be discovered on Mars. Let's go to Glenn in Texas. Hi, Glenn. You're on with Timothy Beckley. Go ahead.
Hello, Clyde, Tim. How y'all doing?
Great.
Wonderful.
I think we always project ourselves into an alien scenario. Our human euphemism. It's like listening to a Disney wildlife show. It's not really accurate. I think, unfortunately, we could be facing creatures with no emotion whatsoever.
Sure.
Do you realize that ants and termites, they have meteorology, they have mineralogy, they have agriculture, they have chemistry, they even have animal husbandry. And we wouldn't call them any way, shape, or form intelligent. But that may be one scenario. There may be an intelligence to the creatures, but they wouldn't be interested in subjugation or power or any kind of emotionalism as we know it.
Right.
And that's really frightening.
You bring up an interesting point, Glenn, and that is the psychoanalysis of the aliens or the psychoanalysis of life if we find it. And you're right, being anthropomorphic with the aliens is also something that may be a mistake. But it's true, though, and Tim, I think you may know this, too. Is Tim still with us?
I'm here. You bet.
There you are. Isn't it interesting, though, that if you're watching a movie about extraterrestrials, we don't care about the extraterrestrials that don't look anthropomorphic. We care more about them if they seem more human-like. And that, I think, is dangerous as well, don't you?
Well, again, there's so many different scenarios that you could pick here. I was thinking before, okay, suppose we come across a negative a group of extraterrestrials, aliens somewhere in space. Mm-hmm. Who's not to say? In fact, this is one of the things that the contactees have always said for years, that we are actually protected, that there are other groups that kind of keep an eye on our atmosphere to make sure that some of these negative groups don't come here and harass us. Of course, it seems like they're getting through on some occasions, but we don't know what we're dealing with. I mean, we have all these cases of different types of ultra-terrestrials from all over the world, so it would seem that some sort of contact with something has already taken place. So I kind of like to bump it up a level beyond the microscopic type.
Right. Glenn, thank you for your call. That's a great call. Let's go now to Terrence in South Carolina. Hi, Terrence. You're on Ground Zero.
Hey, I appreciate you taking my call. I hope you gentlemen are doing well tonight.
We are. Go ahead.
All right. I was listening to your show, and I've been listening to it now strongly for about 2 years now. And in South Carolina, I only get an hour of your broadcast.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm new to I know, right? I'm new to this, the whole conspiracy theory thing, Mars and what have you, and I'm curious to know, do you believe that it could possibly be a plan where these elite, the ones who control us or rule over us, could it be a possibility that they want to find out if life can be supported on Mars so that they can leave this planet because they know of an impending destruction to this planet? I mean, most shows that I've seen, such as The Walking Dead and The X-Files, they deal with these situations where they speak on the elite trying to find a way to get out of here and leave everybody else behind.
Terrence, it's called the breakaway civilization. Tim, do you have any thoughts on the breakaway civilization? Because I know many people have talked about this and the idea that there is some catastrophe looming, and that's why they're rushing towards such dates as 2030, maybe even 2050.
Well, for sure, only the rich are going to get off the planet. I mean, even if we go to one of these like Bob Bigelow, who's got his own space program, private commerce, how much is it going to cost you to take a seat there on his ship? Probably more than you and I, even if we pooled our pennies, would be able to get a seat there. And yes, I think that this breakaway civilization, the secret space program, as we call it, exists. And some of these people, maybe the ultra-rich, maybe some other New World Order, Illuminati, I don't know what you want to call them, have actually been taking part in space travel for many years, without us being aware of it. In fact, even going back to 1897, the UFO flap that took place in the United States and in several other countries as well, many of these ships actually landed and they conversed with farmers and ranchers and ordinary people in several cities. And what did they do? They looked human and they spoke English, and they always concocted some totally absurd story as to where they originated from. They were from Cuba, they were from Holland, they were from Argentina. Now they tell you they're from Mars or Venus. So we really don't know. But yeah, there has been this breakaway civilization or secret space program that's been going on behind our backs. I would suspect. I mean, we've talked about that on the air before. How perhaps even the Germans, as far back as the 1920s, had channeled information from some outside source and had gone off on their own to develop their own space program. And as part of Project Paperclip, we brought them over here to the United States, a lot of these devout Nazis and Germans and scientists, and put them to work. And they probably were working on their own method of getting into space, and that information, I do believe, is being kept from us, and maybe even NASA doesn't know about it.
Well, and we know from last night's show, actually 2 nights ago, Das Mars Project was something that Werner von Braun had thought up and was eventually part of a Disney presentation. And, and so it was put into the public as a possibility of going to Mars long before they even thought about going to the moon. Let's go to Mark in Texas. You're on with Tim Beckley. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, Clyde?
Doing great.
All right, so as I'm listening, I'm hearing more and more people talk about, like space, outer space, travel above our Earth's surface and stuff like that. And what I'm here to ask you today is, do you think this is the only way we'd ever come in contact with extraterrestrial life forms, is traveling above our planet?
No.
Absolutely not.
No, not at all. That's not the only way.
I was learning about the Large Hadron Collider not too long ago, and how about the Large Hadron Collider was used to find the Higgs boson. And I guess it got shut down for a while, and now it is being independently funded in Switzerland. And what they are doing now is pretty crazy. And as I was listening to you talk earlier about a bunch of warnings that have been happening, I've just heard a lot of hoopla here and there about the blood moon, and if something has to do with the Jews and everybody getting together, and there's all these warning signs that they do start to make sense. And as I was watching this, I guess documentary type deal about how CERN is using the Large Hadron Collider to do something greater, and it was relating a lot of the things to the Christian Bible, and they coincided pretty good. Although I'm an agnostic, I do believe that a lot of things in the Bible are,
Well, I mean, we can fit
taken out of context.
We can fit any prophecy into what is happening now. Many people have fit prophecy. Anthony Patch has been on the program talking about CERN fitting that into prophecy. But the bottom line is they told us that it was time to find the Higgs boson. They allegedly found the Higgs boson. And then from there, the idea was to open a Rosen bridge wide enough and long enough to send something through or have something come back. And if you believe what Anthony Patch has been saying, the whole idea is to make a conduit wormhole to places like Saturn and Jupiter and other planets. They could also construct a wormhole that could take us directly to Mars in a short amount of time rather than long-term space travel. All we have to do is just walk through the wormhole to the other side, or walk through the stable wormhole that they create and walk to the other side. I know that sounds so science fiction, but science fiction is becoming more science fact as we progress in what is called the future that they talked about in comic books and the Jetsons. It's really amazing.
I definitely agree with you on that one, man. I can't disagree on that one. And it's good that, to me, you mentioned how it's a wormhole to get us somewhere in our physical world. What I was thinking, and what had been an idea on my mind, it was something like dimensional travel.
Well, of course.
If that's possible.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about, using the dimensional doorways to open up.
Well,
Tim?
you know, even psychics going back 100 or 200 years, there was a medium who wrote a book, I think it was probably in around 1870 or so, called From India to the Planet Mars. And a lot of people that were involved in paranormal research at that time were taking out-of-body trips and claiming that they were going to other planets and meeting, intelligent beings there. Now, who's to say we're looking for microscopic beings and so forth? Who's to say that there aren't beings that live in a parallel universe or another dimension that are invisible to us?
Oh, yeah.
Under normal conditions. Well, we've discussed that before, and you've had other guests on the program, Clyde, that brought up their own experiences or experiences along this line.
We were talking, when we were talking about CERN, there are alien beings that can be just pure light, or alien beings that are not seen, and yet you feel their presence, and the idea that many of them wish to incarnate. And how are they going to do so? That if they don't create artificial intelligence, or at least containers for these beings, that they can incarnate and become literally walking and talking physical beings on this planet. And that to me, sounds outrageous, but anymore, nothing so outrageous as to listen to what they're planning for us by mapping the brain and moving things and trying to collect the soul and then going to Mars and finding life. All of these things sound peculiar, and somebody emailed me today and said, I really love it when you talk about world events rather than all this alien stuff. And I wrote her back and I says, what are you talking about? This is world events. They have announced this. And she says, well, aliens aren't real, they're demons. I said, wake up. I mean, this has been happening for some time now. They finally have told us a little bit of the puzzle, not the whole, they haven't given us the whole puzzle yet. But I'm just thinking, this is a world event. It's no longer paranormal. This is part of normalcy now. Our normalcy bias has been stepped on with regard to the aliens, and now we have to figure out what's the next phase, the next step for NASA to report. Mark, thanks for the call. Tim Beckley with us tonight on Ground Zero. We'll be back with more. Don't go away. And this is Ground Zero. Timothy Beckley with us tonight on Ground Zero, Mr. UFO. I wanted to ask something before we go to another call, Tim. I'm very surprised at how this was all accepted, how this has all been taken. The announcement was made, and there wasn't as much excitement as I had thought about this issue. And that I figured it would be buzzed and buzzed and buzzed on the news, but no, politics are still capturing the imaginations, or at least the media is pushing politics and pushing these things so we don't think about the possibility of life. Is that the case? Because I'm really surprised that there aren't no, intense or in-depth coverage or 3-day coverages in the news cycle.
Well, of course, the Pope was, around during this period as well. But, maybe the media considers it, like I say, some of this has been done before. Maybe they're looking for a little bit more hardcore evidence. I don't know if anybody taken a survey or a poll of the public to see what they think of the idea that there may be water on Mars. I mean, I would think that it did not get the coverage that it deserved.
I agree.
That's for sure. The buzz about it on the internet was the hype was bigger than the actual release of the information. I would have thought that they would have had a press conference on CNN, and they have in the past, but I don't know. Maybe there's just too much news going on. You got to space these things just at the right moment.
Yeah, maybe their timing was up, but then again, The Martian opens this Friday. Let's go to Arnold in Ohio. You're on Ground Zero.
Hey, I wanted to bring forth a couple of things about the human race, mankind, and what we don't do. We usually jump before we look. I'll give you 2 examples. The tin can was invented before the can opener. And the second thing is that in the early space age, we sent a disk on a satellite out into the universe that told exactly where we are, who we are, what planet we're on, and a sample of the English language and a few other things. Why would you want to do that and not know what's on the receiving end?
It's true.
And I want to use those 2 parables. Anything that they may find of any life form anywhere else it needs to be left where it is until you can figure out how to contain it and control it before you even think about bringing it back to Earth.
Or watch it and not touch it, because I'm sure that once again we have the directives for extraterrestrial contact, laws against incoming contact, and of course we may even invent the prime directive, the same as what is on Star Trek. And of course we've actually fashioned and modeled a lot of our gadgets and things we use today on the Star Trek the idea of the Star Trek model. So who knows what will happen. Arnold, thanks for the call. Timothy, thank you for being on the program tonight. It was a very interesting conversation.
Well, my pleasure, always to be on Ground Zero. And one last reminder, if anybody is intrigued by the information that I am able to supply, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Mr. UFO's Secret Files. We have about 55 interviews up there, many of which I've done on my program, which is Exploring the Bizarre, and some while traveling around the country. It's all a mysterious universe, and I'm looking to continue to forward to explore it.
Tim Beckley, Mr. UFO, thank you for being on the program tonight.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. Take care. And that's Ground Zero for tonight. Join us tomorrow night, and we may be exploring a little bit about what's going on with Syria. We're looking into any stories that we may have in the Ground Zero angle to that. I mean, that's always been the case when coming with breaking stories tonight. I thought the story broke a little late, so we went with this story. Tomorrow we may approach this. No guarantees, but still, we're doing our best to get you the most information we can on this program, always trying to bring you an honest and interesting look into the world right here on Ground Zero. Good night.
FM News 101 KXL.